Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comments section of my Q&A videos or have sent to me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. Alright, I posted a critical thinking video this week, and you can tell the critical thinking ones, if you guys didn't tell, I have a little color coding on the thumbnails on my videos. The blue ones are my critical thinking type videos, and the red ones are my Scientology type videos. And it hasn't always been that way, but it's been that way for a good long time. And I don't know, I think some people see blue and just go, da, 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 rah. And I really wish you guys would check those out because I put a lot of thought into them, and they also tend to chronicle, some pretty important changes and points of education for me as a critical thinker and as a human being and as somebody who is recovering from a destructive cult. And those critical thinking videos are part of that. And you'll notice if you do watch it and check it out that there's some good advice in there, I think, for anyone on any end of any political spectrum, belief spectrum of any kind. Maybe that might be a better way for me to put it. Because it's very important that we be able to question our own side and our own ideas, and that's super important. And recently I've been doing some of that and having some very nice, liberating thoughts, let's put it that way, and able to look at things a little bit differently. And I think that I'm hoping that will only improve the quality of the content that I'm providing for you guys, because I don't want to be boxed into, some label here or some label there and just be dismissed based on those labels. That's, I don't think that's right. And I think that we can all be a bit smarter and more open to other ideas and things like that. And so I want to put those out there. And you'll see that probably reflected in my podcasts more so than anything else. But we'll see. We got more. I got so many things in the queue to get out to you guys, Scientology related and otherwise. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of let you know about that and encourage you to check that video out. It's all of 11 minutes long. And then also, of course, my podcast this week took a little bit of an interesting turn, which was a reflection of some of my thoughts from that video and from some things that I've been looking at lately. So, all that being said, I am in Chicago today as you're watching this. I'm actually coming home from HowdyCon, if all is going well. So that all being said, let's go ahead and get on with your questions. Andrea Diamond, can you give a few quick examples of things you once believed or did as a Scientologist that you now shake your head at and think, I can't believe I thought or did that? God, where to start? There's so many things. I got to thinking about this, and just one thing after another started coming up as I was sort of like looking in my memory there, like, oh God, yeah, there was this and this and this. Man, there were so many things that I put up with as a Scientologist, and especially as a Sea Org member, that were just so ridiculous, so ludicrous. You convinced yourself, I convinced myself that it was all for the greater good and that it was necessary that I do those things. And of course, all of that was just total nonsense. Some of the living conditions, the putting up with living in a room with my wife for 17 years as a Sea Org member, a room. Putting up with staying up until 2, 3, 4 in the morning sometimes for days at a time. Come on, it's ridiculous. But as far as some things I look back on and I just go, oh man, I can't believe I did that. I used to strut around in my Sea Org uniform on the base. I was a management person, so I had some degree of authority because I was working over at the management organization. At least I had thought I had some authority. It's funny, the way you can kind of fool yourself about that too. And I would, and I feel silly and a little bit, about how I treated some people as a result of that. I would try, and sometimes, especially when I was a little jacked about something, to emulate the more abusive or stern way that some senior Sea Org executives would act, yelling and pounding the fist on the table and really, and I'm gonna, I think one time I actually got like so upset. I was like in such a little, I was over at the LA organization across the street from where I worked, and I was talking to another Sea Org member there, and I had her in her office. She was the flag representative, the representative for this, and she was this pretty kind old lady, really. I mean, she was in her 60s or something. She'd been around for a long time, longer than I had. And she'd seen everything, kind of done everything. And I was yelling at her. I was like, rah, rah, and what the hell with this thing? And how is this program target not done, or whatever nonsense thing that I was yelling about. And I said, it just came out. I pounded the table and I said, and if this doesn't get done, I'm gonna kill you or something. I think I said that. And I look back and I'm just like, what was I thinking? And she, just bless her heart, she actually suppressed a giggle when I did that. And it kind of diffused me in my head. I was like, ugh. And because normally I was not that way. And it was so weird to try to muster that up and be that way. And I watched other Sea Org members do that, executives. They would try to put on this mask or put on this coat of toughness, and they were going to go rip into somebody, and this was what they were going to do. And they knew that it wasn't them. They didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that, but I felt that that's what I was supposed to do, and that was what was expected of me. Pretty dangerous mindset, really, when you get into that way of thinking that's okay. It can lead to much worse things. And that's, so I look back on that and I just go, man, from one angle, it's very funny and stupid because there wasn't really any harm in that circumstance, because she knew what was going on. She knew the drill, and she knew I was just being, the way I thought I was supposed to be. And it really was very stupid. And I think, every other time I had dealt with her, I had been more of, look, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. How do we debug this? How do we work on this? And it was more of a conversation. So this time it was like, no, I can't be that way with her. I got to go give her the what for. So, I kind of look back on those times, which were few, I think, at least that I recall. Probably too many as far as some other people are concerned. But, I look back on those and I just go, ugh, what a dork, And I really also look back on some things that I did or agreed to with the RPF when I was on the Rehabilitation Project Force in the Sea Org, that I just go, man, some of the, especially when I first got there was kind of this almost hazing period where I was just run to the point of exhaustion, and I was so beaten down and introverted already from just having been there, just being in the status of being an RPFer, this lower of the lowest class of citizen in the Sea Org, kind of the lowest caste, I guess you could say, the untouchables, that already was demeaning and diminishing of my morale and my self-image. But then to be run so ragged, and there were times I was just kind of walking along in the halls, dusting the walls and crying. It was like bad. And putting up with that, thinking that was normal, that was that treating people that way and putting them in a situation like that was in any way an acceptable thing to do, agreeing with that. That was, I look back at that and I just go, what? Wow. I would not do that again. I wouldn't do that to people, and I wouldn't do that to myself unless somebody literally had a gun on me. And that would be the kind of circumstance it would take now in order for me to put myself in that kind of a situation again, or deal with that kind of an abusive environment. So those kind of things, I think, are what come to mind, pretty straight away. And the last thing I'll mention is because I'd like to end this on a slightly lighter note, is I also, getting into this mindset that the world was going to end tomorrow if I didn't get X, Y, or Z done. And X, Y, and Z were the stupidest things. Even when I was traveling around the country near the end in the last few years, driving around doing logistics work, not taking some time to just kind of look around and I did take some time, but I didn't, really take enough to just stop and smell the roses, and think, and I look back and I just go, man, I was so focused, I was so intense, and I was so driven to work, and I was in this mindset that if I didn't get these things done, that it was somehow going to affect the survival of the world. I mean, how arrogant do you have to be, you know, to think that you're so special, that you're in a position where your every action on a day-to-day basis is what determines the future of mankind. I mean, wow. Wow, you know? I mean, yeah, there's some delusion and stuff there, but there's some arrogance of supreme, you know, magnitude there. And that was, you know, that's where my head was at. So I don't know. I think those are some things that might give some things I look back on now and just go, whoa. Hamish Downey. It seems a bit hypocritical that LRH was into sex magic rituals and Aleister Crowley when Scientology is so puritanical. What do you think caused such a change of mind? I think it's a couple things. Thing number one is I think that it came from a desire to control people. And sex is absolutely a wonderful control mechanism if you are a destructive cult leader or somebody who's in a position of authority and power over other people's lives to that degree. You know, almost same thing. If you can regulate somebody's sex life, you kind of in a way hold the power of life and death, you know, over them. I mean, because we're talking reproduction here, reproductive rights, right? In a way, or at least that's what it equates to in a person's head. And so, you know, you really hold a lot of power, and this can be power that can really derange people. You know, when you curtail their ability to express themselves sexually, you are exerting a lot of force and authority over a person, and it can really mess them up. All you know, Catholic priests or monks or these people who, you know, take these vows of chastity and then later regret it, and they don't own up to that, and then they're, you know, stuck in this sort of like must have it, can't have it, you know, sort of thing. And that's not a good place to be. You know, that's kind of crazy making. So so to wield that power is to wield a lot of power, and you know that you've really got people by the balls, you know, when you control them that way. So I think that serves a purpose for a megalomaniac type person like L. Ron Hubbard, or even more fittingly, David Miscavige, who has really increased the controls on that topic of sex in the Sea Org and with Scientology in general. I've done interviews with people on my channel who we talk about the old days of Scientology, where it was much looser, much freer, much more liberal, and in the 70s and even into the early 80s, you know, this thing about, you know, controlling people's masturbation or controlling their sex life or how many people they were sleeping with. Nobody cared. It wasn't a thing. And then, you know, Miscavige, I mean, there was some degree of it, but then Miscavige took over and it really went crazy. Now, that leads me to the second part, right? Which was, I think Hubbard started putting controls in on people's sex life as the head of the Sea Org for another reason too. And that was that in a group of people who were so tightly connected as people on a ship, sailing around, you know, the Mediterranean and Madrid and Spain and that whole area, you know, then especially coming out of the 60s with free love and all that at being the attitude, and into the 70s, you know, these people would arrive, and I'm not going to go so far as to say that there were orgies on the Apollo or something on the ships that Hubbard owned, but there was definitely, I mean, no question about it. I've heard from people who were there that, you know, people were sleeping around, and that can't help but cause jealousy, feuding, upsets, arguments, fights. It just happens because people's passions run high and their emotions run high when they start making connections with other people. And, he likes her, but she likes this other guy, but, then she sleeps with him, but she really doesn't want to, or she does, but she also likes this other guy, or he likes, multiple women. And I mean, it goes both ways. This is not any kind of gender. I'm not speaking anything gender-wise here. I'm just saying that it creates problems within a group, especially these tight-knit groups, and so it becomes regulated to some degree. I mean, the U.S. Navy regulates this behavior on their ships, as I understand it, and so Hubbard looked at some of the fighting and the upset and turmoil that free love, a free love attitude would create on his ships, and he was like, yeah, screw that. We got, this mission to do. I want you people focused on what I want you focused on. And I don't want all this turmoil between people, because that doesn't really help anybody or anything. And so he put in place, this 2D rules thing where he kind of comes down with a sledgehammer, and instead of doing or saying something sensible or dealing with individuals, maybe you make an example or two out of some people so that everybody kind of snaps to and gets the idea that they shouldn't be engaging in relationship activity that's going to distract them from their work or something in that kind of an environment. And it's not an entirely unsensible attitude to have. But instead of doing that, he comes down like Captain Bligh, because he's, L. Ron Hubbard, and he writes that there's no sex before marriage, no heavy petting, no, this, in this one-page issue that he wrote. And suddenly, it goes from kind of a free-for-all or a loosey-goosey, no regulation sort of thing to this ultimate regulation situation. And that, both ends are wrong. There's probably some, something in the middle where it would have worked out better. So that is why I think Hubbard decided to come down on it so hard, though. And he just went, okay, well, we're just gonna deal with this so we never have to deal with it again. And, obviously not a good idea. So, I don't know. That's what I can say about that. Dear Racer, when going through the routing out process, what is it you are asked to do, and how can it possibly take so long? All right, routing out, which means leaving staff or leaving the Sea Org in Scientology. It's called routing out because, as I've explained before, there is a piece of paper which has a series of steps on it that you have to get done in order to finish whatever it is you're trying to do, whether it's getting a person signed up for and onto a course, or signed up and paid and into an auditing session, or getting a staff member who got sick, getting him sent to the medical guy and getting him straightened out. There's routing forms. There's these pieces of paper that have all these steps on them for all these different situations, and they're called routing forms because they route you around the organization from here to here to here. All right, that's the idea that's why it's called routing out. You're leaving. You're taking the route through the organization to get you out of there. And it's a process because one, and the most important reason why it takes a long time is because they don't want you to go. They have every vested interest in holding on to you and keeping you there for as long as they can, because the longer you're there, the better chance that you're just going to change your mind and stay. And they'd rather have you there, halfway in than all the way out. Because then they can work you and love bomb you and handle you and all the other things that they do in order to keep you on board. Scientology is desperate for people. All destructive cults are desperate for people. They are, they got a mission, man. They got things they got to do, and they need people. They need all the hands to make these things happen. And they, generally speaking, want everybody in the world on board with them. So, when somebody leaves, it's the antithesis of what they're trying to accomplish. So they're automatically negative towards the entire process, and they're going to enter as many delays into it as they can. So then you have the steps of the routing form itself, and that involves seeing various people. I don't remember it all off the top of my head, but basically a series of people who you have to explain yourself to, like the ethics officer. I think the chaplain is on there, so you have somebody to talk to, and really it's just another that I've explained on this in this Q&A series before what the chaplain is, and it's really just a kinder, gentler ethics officer. But basically, you have these people who you have to convince you have a good reason for leaving, and you're still on board, still a good guy, you're not a suppressive person, and it's not like they automatically assume you're suppressive, but they're definitely looking at you, sideways, right? Like, what do you mean you want to leave? Why do you want to leave? So then you have Hubbard's directions, which I've talked about many times before, about how if you want to leave, or you're critical of the organization, or you're fault finding, then that's because of your own overts, your sins, the things you've done against the organization or against people in the organization that you shouldn't have done. Maybe you stole some things, maybe you lied, maybe you false reported your statistics, maybe you, did something you shouldn't have done with a public person. Maybe there's, who knows what you've been up to. But whatever it is, they want to get all of it out of you first. They want you to confess everything. So you will first sit down and do what's called an OW write-up, an overt and withhold write-up, where you have to write down every single thing you can think of. And then, after that's done, if you still want to leave, then clearly there must be more, because that's what Hubbard says. People who want to leave, they have overts. So then they have to arrange to get you in for a security check. That means an auditor has to sit down with you in a room for hours and ask you sharp and pointed questions about your leaving. And about, what have you done that you haven't that you're withholding? What have you, is there some overt you've committed as a staff member? As a staff member, did you do a bad job on your post? On your, all these questions. There's tons of them. And anything you can kind of imagine to dig around as to, did you steal anything, from your post? Did you lie to your senior? Have you ever false reported your statistics? Like all these things. They're going to ask you all of this on the meter, and it's going to take hours. And that consumes an auditor's time. Most of the organizations of Scientology don't have a lot of auditors. And the auditors they do have are the ones that are servicing paid public. That's the priority. So they're going to fit you in when they can. They're already reluctant to deal with you at all because they'd rather have you around. Then they have to do this whole song and dance to get an auditor and get your folder looked at. They also make sure, as part of this, that there isn't any bad auditing that's happened to you. And of course, you could argue that all auditing's bad. But from within Scientology's point of view, they're looking for errors that have been committed on your case. Auditors screwing up, give bad directions that were given to the auditors to carry out on you that maybe didn't work so good. Maybe that caused your disaffection and caused you to want to leave. So they want to look into your auditing, and they're going to want to fix it. That's actually something they do before they start getting into all the sec checking. If the case repair doesn't work, then they're like, okay, this guy's got overts and we got to figure out what they are. Only after they have finished all that. And a sec check is, once it's started, generally speaking, they don't add a lot of questions to it. Maybe it's 10, 15, 20 questions. They're going to ask those to you. You got to get through the whole process. You get a floating needle on every question indicating that you've confessed everything. Then, if you still want to leave, then you get to go. Okay? That's basically the routing out process. I might have missed a couple steps, but basically that's what it entails. It took me 8 or 9 months to get through mine, mostly because I was waiting for an auditor. I had no leverage. I wasn't going to pay for it. I couldn't afford that. So I had to wait until they freed up an auditor to take me in session and do my security check. Once that got started, it was only about a week and I was done, because I had done the RPF. I knew how to get through a sec check. So, basically that's the deal. And they can delay this stuff for a really long time if they want to. And that's what tends to drag those things out. Preserve big cats. What section of the universe did Hubbard lay his foundation of the Xenu story? I heard Venus was involved somehow / somewhere. But my point is, wouldn't Scientologists want to know if there's any astronomical evidence left over? And why hasn't it been put forth by the Astronomical Society? Okay, so let me take up the last part of your question first, because when you're a Scientologist and when you've gotten up to OT3, you are all in. At that point, You have been security checked. You've been raked over the coals a lot of times. They trust you, and they trust that you are all in with L. Ron Hubbard and that his word is law. So unless you're a Paul Haggis type who gets to that level, reads the material and goes, what? This is crazy, and, hits the road, unless that happens, if you read the material and you go, yeah, that sounds legit, right? Then you don't care what astronomers like Neil deGrasse Tyson or astrophysicists have to say about that material. Hubbard said it was law, and that's all you needed to hear. Because Hubbard has convinced Scientologists that scientists, astrophysicists, physicists, engineers, chemists, they don't know what they're talking about. Hubbard knows what the real deal with science is. They don't. And so they're not going to take, Neil deGrasse Tyson's word over L. Ron Hubbard's. So, and even the briefest of critical looking at the material of OT3 it breaks down immediately in the face of the Earth's geography and geology, the plate tectonics. I mean, there's so many things that show that Hubbard's story is pure madness that, but Scientologists can't let themselves go there. So that's why they don't really care about anybody validating Hubbard's works. Now, if somebody were to indicate that it was true, they'd go, see, right? But nobody's doing that. So instead, like I said, all the evidence points to it being ridiculous and being a hallucinatory fable. So they're not going to accept, that evidence against it. All right. As far as where it all happened, this just becomes the most fascinating stuff. Hubbard was so random in dropping these hints and stories about where things happened and what the cosmology of our universe was. So you have this Markab confederacy, and it's supposed to consist of the 13 habitated or habitable star systems around Earth, of which we're part. We were Tegeac in this old story. But that's just this sector of the universe, this little corner of it. And the Markabs were supposed to be the civilization that existed here that ruled over this sector of the galaxy. And Xenu, or Xemu, was this guy, the galactic overlord, who owned or ran this territory, and he was kind of like Pol Pot or, Kim Jong-un or something. So he's not a real nice guy, and he engaged in this whole genocidal procedure to deal with overpopulation. But that was just here, in this corner of the Milky Way. In the big Y universe, there's all kinds of other things going on. Hubbard talked about a galactic council, which consisted of people who were kind of half bodies and half spiritual entities, like they were aware of their spiritual nature or spiritual selves. And it wasn't really clear to me, but I don't think that he talked about that earlier than he talked about the whole Xenu thing. So that wasn't necessarily supposed to be part of the whole Markab thing. Then he brings up this Markabian civilization in a number of places. Then he brings up how there are implant stations on Mars and on Venus. So if you are, if you're a Thetan and you die, your body dies, and you manage to get off this planet, because there's also implant stations here on Earth too. But if you manage to get off this planet, then maybe you'll get sucked into Mars and you'll get implanted there, because those apparently were, there were a series of invader forces, I think 5 or 6 of them or something, that have come through this solar system over its history. And they have set up installations in different places, Mars, Venus, and they have had battles. Hubbard talks about how old Egypt was actually a spacefaring civilization, and how there were battles going on between these invader forces, right out of sight of the civilization, the Egyptian civilization, and how if you look at some of the hieroglyphics and some of the pictures of the pharaohs, then you can see, laser guns. It's like Hubbard would have fit on Ancient Aliens perfectly. It was aliens, right? He just would have fit just hand in glove with that show, because he was always dropping hints about that stuff. I mean, hell, he talked about Lemuria and Atalanta and how these old civilizations existed on this planet, and there were these giant people who roamed around, you know, the Lemurians or something. I mean, he was just dropping this stuff left, right, and center. I mean, this goes all the way back to History of Man in 1952, where he's talking about the Piltdown Man as a real thing. So, you know, Hubbard just threw in, you know, Bermuda Triangle. I think somewhere in a lecture he mentioned that that was either an implant station or a crashed ship, probably some spaceship crashed in the middle of the ocean there at the center of the Bermuda Triangle, and it's just been sucking in other ships to it because it's, you know, down there doing whatever. I don't know, whatever logic he was using there. Of course, we've been over this territory in submersibles and submarines and things. Nobody's finding any spaceships down there. But Hubbard would just throw this stuff out in a lecture, and it just sounded so good at the time, and it fit in with whatever story he was telling. And if you try to piece all this stuff together, it doesn't come together in a coherent whole, is really the point of all this randomness that I'm throwing out at you. It's not a logically consistent integrated whole. So that's about as much as I can talk about with it sensibly. I mean, we could, you know, draw conclusions, connect dots that don't connect, and somehow make this cosmology all work, but I don't know that it was ever clear in Hubbard's head. And that's all what I can tell you off the top of my head about it. I hope that it was entertaining, at least, if not as informative as maybe it could have been. John Poor Skofteson. I was on holiday in New York last December. I've had some kind of fascination with Scientology for a few years, and I decided to stop by the New York org to buy Dianetics. I just wanted to buy the book because I wanted to read it. The staff member who helped me didn't let go until I signed up for a free 6-month trial membership to the IAS. He also wanted me to sign up for some seminars, but I lied. I was leaving that day. I was in a hurry and wrote a wrong email address and my home address to derail them, but still they found me in Iceland and have sent me 3 magazines and a form to sign up for a long-term membership, which I have no intention to do. My question is, I have only made it to page 40. Do you think I should finish the book? I'm trying to say, does it help me to understand Scientology better? You know, it's kind of up to you. It's a silly book and it doesn't read very well, but you can get through it, and if you're interested, you should. It'll give you insight into how L. Ron Hubbard sort of thought about things and how he convinced a bunch of people to follow him. I mean, if you could read this book from the point of view of somebody who actually believes it, or thinks that he's really making some amazing scientific discoveries and points there, well, kudos to you. Most Scientologists have a hard time reading Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. It's a difficult book to read. It took me a long time, and really what I would tell people is the first 100 pages were the worst. That if you could get through those, the rest of it goes downhill. The rest of it's pretty easy to get through. So, you know, I would never tell someone, you know, don't read that book. I mean, you know, you should if you want to. Oh my God! It is time for Flash Answers. Kathy Diop. Why is there no information about trials or justice done about the child abuses and child slavery? Are there videos about that? I'd like to know because I'm sick about all those videos of the horrible testimonies, and I have to watch videos about them put on trial and about justice being done. Well, I'm sorry, Kathy, but there hasn't been any justice done yet in terms of child abuse and child slavery in Scientology, so I don't really know where to direct you. I can tell you that there is an active court case that looks like it's finally making its way to getting in front of a jury in California. That is Laura DiCrescenzo's case, and it is being documented well on Tony Ortega's blog. So go ahead and Google that, check out the history of that case and what's happening with it, because that is pretty much the most promising case I know of in terms of taking Scientology to task for what they have done to kids. And that's about the best hope I can give you on that. Kathy Reynolds. I found a used copy of Dianetics, and I will admit, as a voracious reader, I'm having a lot of trouble getting through this book. I love to read, but as I read this book, I just keep getting the feeling that L. Ron Hubbard was out of his mind. I've never had anything to do with Scientology, but seeing his lectures, interviews, and reading his words, he had something not working right in his head. Is there anything he wrote that is really good? That's a good question. There's some good commentary there, Kathy. No, I can't. You know, if you don't like Dianetics, it's not like I can point to other things. I mean, there's some things that he wrote in a book called New Slant on Life that sound fairly practical and commonsensical, and those are good. There's some good essays in there. You know, there's a thing called What is Greatness, where he talks about some decent stuff. But even there, he throws in some hooks and some barbs that you got to be careful of. That was the thing about Hubbard, is even the stuff that sounded all right had these undercurrents of stuff that were not good at all. So you know, it's you got to be a little careful reading around Hubbard. You know, I'll say that. But if you're not getting anything about Dianetics, and Dianetics seems like it's just written by a madman, then just drop it. Drop the whole subject, because he was not a great pulp fiction writer. Battlefield Earth is not an atrocity of a book, but it's not a great book either. Stephen King has praised a horror novella that he wrote called Fear. That might be something you might get some enjoyment out of. It's an interesting, twisty book. It's got some really weird stuff in it, but it's, you know, for what it is, it's not horrible. And there was a book also that Hubbard was praised for by many people, called Final Blackout, and that is a sort of a post-apocalyptic story about leadership and the nature of leadership. And believe it or not, it's got some pretty good stuff in it. But again, you know, yeah, we got to be a little careful reading it because there's some twists and turns. So that's about all I can say as far as other people recommending Hubbard's works that I would, you know, maybe throw your way. Ashley Mamello. Who audits David Miscavige? Could they blackmail him with his records? Yeah, I'd like to see them try. Nobody audits David Miscavige. He hasn't gone in session since like 1994. And he's not at all interested in going into auditing sessions as far as I know. I mean, you know, I've never really been privy to David Miscavige's auditing schedule, but that's what I'm told by people who were, and we assume still are. So no, nobody's going to be blackmailing David Miscavige. He's you know, he's not that guy who's going to have that happen to him. If somebody even tried, even hinted that they were going to do something like that to him, he would have them taken out. And I don't mean killed. I mean, he would have them forcibly taken out of Scientology in the worst possible way. Yeah, so that's how that would go down. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for coming around and watching the show this week. I hope you found my answers informative, educational, and interesting. And if you did, please consider joining up on Patreon. I could definitely use your support and help to keep this channel going and keep me going so I can continue bringing you the content that you guys like so much. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.